Hi, I'm Laura from Pilates Process, and today I'm going to do a few exercises that are really great therapeutic exercises. Even in therapeutic work, not everything is good for everyone, so pay attention, see how it works for your body. But these are really targeted exercises we do in the studio for different types of hip pain and IT band and that type of thing. We do require a ball this size or smaller, a soft ball. You could probably even use a soccer ball for some of them if you don't have an option, and preferably a TheraBand. These things make the options a lot easier, a lot more clear. Okay, so we're going to start with a really specific hip exercise. With all of this stuff, you're trying to get a sense of the back of the hip working, the deep hip muscles underneath the glutes, and not the front and the hip flexor working. Okay, that's always the goal, not always easily attainable. So to start, we're going to be on our tummy with the foot resting on the ball. And you can either be on your elbows or right down, whatever your back is happy with. Okay, I'm going to stay like this so I can talk more easily. So a little bit of ab support here, the quad really relaxed. And what you're going to do is engage from your bum, from your glute, to draw the knee off the mat. Hold it for a second, see if you can get a sense of the glute working, and then release it back down. So I'm really literally thinking of the bum picking up the thigh bone and drawing that thigh back in space. Release it down. As we do this, I'm trying not to squish the ball too much. So what we don't want to see is all quad where the ball gets squished. We want to see that the glute is stabilizing from the back of the joint. It might feel like you can't fully straighten your knee without your hip gripping, and that's fine. Whatever range you feel like that can draw the thigh back, melt and release it down. Okay, the glute picks up the thigh and releases it down. And then we're going to stay there, and you can try this one. So the same rules, the foot quite light on the ball, and you can just roll out and bring it back. So quite a small motion that we're moving the ball out to the side and bringing it back. You can pivot a little bit. You can see my knee and foot are turning out a touch. That's all coming from the hip control. The quad's still quite relaxed. Okay, let's stay there. You can reset. If you ever feel your quad, you can reset. You can come back down, relax the front of the thigh, find that glute to come up again. We're going to squish the ball this time and use that glute to pick the thigh up. Squish the ball down and lift up. It probably won't lift all the way up off the ball. Engage the front of the thigh, release the front of the thigh. So you can think of it from that front end of engage and release, or you can think of it as letting the glute go, the glute picks the leg up. Letting the glute go, the glute picks the leg up. Okay? And you want to do, if that's feeling fine, or whatever version of it feels the best, you want to kind of do till it fatigues, okay? Or until your form is no longer giving you that glute feedback. Okay, but ideally like 10 or 20. Release back down. That's a great one. You can repeat that to the other side. So it was the knee lifts, and then the second option was the rolling side and coming back. And the third option was the squish and lift, and squish and lift, and it's usually done head down. Okay, so that's one of our favorite options we use. Sometimes not everyone's back loves that, so it might feel that when you're done with that, that you need to do some kind of mobilizing. Cat stretch is always one of our favorites, that you can do a little rounding, just lightly. You never want to really force to end range. You almost want to think of the skeleton doing the motion rather than the muscles. Okay, you can also try a little side bending and side bending here. Okay, another specific hip option that we tend to teach a lot is having a TheraBand underneath the thigh, or I give this as homework a lot, I should say. Okay, it's probably better if it's a little bit heavier than green, but this works fine too. And it's just trying to teach the front of the hip to relax a bit. So it almost becomes an arm exercise. I'm just going to let the foot drop in towards the bum and lazily let my leg lift. So I'm almost thinking of melting through here, imagining that thigh bone dropping down as I let the sit bone widen, the back of that hip let go. Okay, lazily lifting and lowering. Sinking through here. If that feels okay, you could stay there and just circle the leg slightly in the hip, allowing the inner thigh to lengthen a little bit. If it doesn't like that, stick to the lift lower. That's the thing with private sessions, is we can continually adapt to how your body responds to an exercise. Okay, it'll almost feel like nothing if it's doing well, other than a little bit of weird arm work. Okay, so let's try that to the other side. All right, and you can wrap it through the hands. Same idea. Core is on a little bit, but more importantly than the core is just the cueing of letting the foot drop, letting the thigh melt. That we get a little bit of that mobility and we kind of talk to the hip flexors to release a little bit. You can imagine, as the legs come up, the mechanics are actually the thigh bone does truly sink back in the socket. So sometimes imagining that happening, that it rolls and sinks, is helpful to cue the hip flexor to release. Okay, if that feels okay, we can go to small little circles here. Okay, we'll take that away, and we'll try doing little knee drops here. So relax the back. You can sort of rock your pelvis, let it settle. Same idea of expanding your low abs, or almost thinking of those hip bones widening. And we're going to allow the knees to open side. Come back up to parallel. And we're really just thinking of that inner thigh lengthening. You're allowing that to release, and that's what's controlling your legs out. Nothing on the outside is working. And that brings it back up. Often the inner thighs get a little shaky on this if you're doing it well. And it's not about going to end range and sitting into a stretch at all. It's about that inner range control, that you're cueing those muscles to elongate and to come back. And we're thinking of a sinking and melting again in the front of the hip joint. Breathing through that. And rest there. Just in a passive action, while you're lying here, you can imagine the thigh. A lovely image is that it's almost sinking into quicksand. If you think you've got this weighted, gooey sand, and you're letting the weight of the thigh bone just slowly, with gravity, melt down into the socket more, that can be a nice image if you stay with that for a moment to release that tension as well. The last thing I'm going to give you is in standing. Okay, so in standing, we're going to look at a standing hinge. So I find this easier if we have 1 foot forward, 1 foot back. Okay, and just take a moment of reminding yourselves of where the hip sockets are. If you've done some Franklin work before, they do this great idea of marking. You can feel those pelvic bones. If you trace that line down to the pubic bone and back a few times, the kind of the halfway point is where our thigh bone, our femur bone, fits into the actual hip socket. So if I face this way, so our hip joints are way down here, not up here. Okay, so that's an important marker for a hinge to be able to help you. So in this position, I want you to tap your glutes a little bit, tap your bum, so you've got some brain to that area alive. You're going to just squeeze and release your glutes a few times. Okay? And then if you can think sit bones, you can actually find those bony points. They're the bones that we sit on at the base of the pelvis. Okay, those are going to be good markers for us as well. So in this position, I just want you to do a little bit of a hinge. So I'm sending the sit bones wide and back and kind of passively folding at the hip socket. To come back, I'm not going to use my quads. I'm going to think of those sit bones narrowing together to bring me up. And the glutes working. So I hinge forward, and it's really going to be from the back of the hip joint, from the sit bones, that pivots me back. Don't go too far that you're sinking and stretching out those hip sockets. We're just going to roll the pelvis over the thigh, come up to where it's centered, and feel that release and widening of the sit bones, and coming back. And really this is partly mobilizing, but a big part of it is waking up those stabilizers at the back of the hip socket. And we're going to do the same thing with the other leg forward. Okay? So same idea, you can clench and release your glutes a few times. It's a good way to get some awareness into a region. And then we're going to splay the sit bones and narrow the sit bones. And splay the sit bones and narrow the sit bones. Let that open and bring it back. If you've done Franklin workshops, you can think of the whole pelvic girdle rolling in. From the back of the hip, from the sit bones, we narrow and it comes up. Sinking in the hip joint. If you feel like you might be bending from your back, you can always have one hand across the sacrum and keep that area steady and not moving so that you know you're truly moving from the hip joints. And the glutes pick you back up. Okay? If you're fine going further, if that feels like it's not a strain on your back and you're comfortable, there's nothing wrong with going for bigger ranges. The work should be felt here still, or a hamstring stretch. It shouldn't start to feel like a low back issue. So just stand now, see if that's calmed down a little bit, see if it's easier to feel like you can be in a relaxed standing position, if there's a little more fluidity to it. If so, that becomes a really great sequence option to you once or twice a day. You don't have to really increase reps, but you can increase frequency of how often you do that little sequence, okay? And you might be able to even figure out which of those few exercises is the most effective and throw that in as often as you can. Okay? You can always email me with questions. It's one of my favorite topics. Thanks.